Kia ora, good morning everyone, Rich Wong here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are taking a look at the latest autofocus lens from Sirui. This is the Sirui Aurora 35mm f1.4. This is a full frame lens with full autofocus and electronic support. It is available for the Nikon Z, Sony E and Leica L mount, with Sirui being an official member of the L mount alliance. This lens is also available for the APS-C Fujifilm X cameras. The sample I received from Sirui is the L mount version, but optically it's the same across all mounts. Before we start, I just want to be clear about a few things. This lens sample was sent to me by Sirui. I don't need to return it, but I also didn't receive any money payment for this review. I do have an affiliate link in the description below if you like to purchase the lens. I just want to make sure everything is clear before we begin. Let's start with the design and build quality. And actually, let's talk about the lens hood first. To me, the lens hood says a lot about how much effort a company puts into a lens. A lot of budget lenses comes with a generic or very flimsy plastic lens hood that don't fit or lock properly. But when I first picked up the lens hood for this Sirui Aurora, I immediately knew this wasn't a cheap budget lens. The lens hood is plastic, but is thick and solid. There's a rubber ring on the outside of the lens hood for extra grip, and the exterior has a nice coating. The lens hood clicks onto the lens perfectly, and there's a proper release button to unlock the lens hood. Very similar to what you expect from a high quality first party lens. So that gives me a great first impression already. The lens itself has a solid metal body that feels very nice, even a bit premium. It has a metal lens mount with a rubber gasket. There's a USB-C port on the lens mount for firmware updates. Sirui said this is a weather-sealed lens. The front element also has a fluorine coating to help repel oil and fingerprints. I mentioned this when I reviewed the Aurora 85mm as well, and I will say it again here. It is for the L mount version. I really hope Sirui will follow the L mount alliance standard and allow firmware updates through the camera body instead of using the USB-C port. In terms of controls, this lens is very well equipped. You get an aperture ring, there is a AF/MF switch, click-to-click switch for the aperture ring, a lock switch to prevent the aperture ring switching between A and minimum aperture, and there's also a custom function button. Sirui has basically added everything that I can think of. The only thing missing is optical image stabilization, so you will need to rely on your camera's IBIS. But most 35mm lenses don't have optical image stabilization. The filter thread is 62mm, which is slightly smaller than the more common 67mm for fast 35mm lenses. It's interesting to see whether this affects vignetting performance. Although Nikon's new 35mm f1.4 also uses a 62mm filter thread. This isn't a compact or lightweight lens, but is very reasonable for a 35mm f1.4. The weight is close to 500 grams. It feels well balanced on a camera like the Panasonic Lumix S1 II, but a bit front heavy on smaller bodies like the Lumix S9. Now let's move on to image quality. At the time of making this review, the price of this Sirui Aurora lens is US $549, which is very attractive for a fast 35mm f1.4 lens. Since I'm reviewing the L mount version, the Lumix 35mm f1.8 is about US $200 more expensive, and the Sigma 35mm f1.4 is even more expensive. So I'm going to compare the Sirui against the Lumix. If the Sirui can keep up, it could be a great value for money option, especially considering it's 2/3 of a stop faster than the Lumix. All image quality tests in this review were shot on the 24MP Panasonic Lumix S5 II. Let's start with center sharpness. At f1.4, the Sirui is already very sharp at the center. Contrast is good, and I don't see any obvious chromatic aberration. Stopping down to f1.8 doesn't really change center sharpness. Performance is very similar to the Lumix. In fact, stopping down makes almost no difference until we reach f11, where diffraction starts to slightly soften the image. Now let's look at the corners. At f1.4, the Sirui is sharp, very sharp. I was genuinely surprised by how sharp this lens is, especially considering this test image was focused at the center, not the corner, and shot wide open with very shallow depth of field. This suggests the lens has minimal field curvature. Comparing this to the Lumix at f1.8, the difference is quite noticeable. Surprisingly, the Sirui is significantly sharper than the Lumix in the corners. The Lumix corners improve when stopped down to f2.8, but the Sirui still remains sharper at the same aperture. It's only around f8 that corner sharpness becomes very similar between the two lenses. The minimum focus distance of the Sirui is 35 cm, giving a maximum magnification of 0.14 times, which is quite decent. Sharpness at minimum focus distance is also reasonably good. However, this is an area where the Lumix performs better. The Lumix can focus down to 24 cm with a 0.22 times maximum magnification, making it more flexible for close-up photography. Thanks to its fast f1.4 aperture, the Sirui Aurora can produce very shallow depth of field images and separate subjects nicely from the background. In terms of bokeh quality, I think the Sirui looks beautiful. The bokeh balls are smooth and not nervous at all. There is a slight oval shape near the corners, but nothing overly swirly or distracting. I have done side-by-side comparisons with the Lumix, and apart from the Sirui being able to open up to f1.4, there isn't a huge difference in the out-of-focus area rendering. If you're wondering how big the difference between f1.4 and f1.8 really is, here are two photos shot with almost identical settings, but one with the Sirui at f1.4 and one with the Lumix at f1.8. You can see the background dissolve a little bit more with Sirui's f1.4 aperture, and the image is also slightly brighter. So is the difference significant? I'll let you decide. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. With vignetting correction enabled, the Sirui performs quite well wide open. At f1.8, it actually shows less vignetting than the Lumix. One stop down further, the performance of these two lenses are very similar, and the Lumix becomes slightly better at smaller apertures. With vignetting correction turned off, vignetting is much more noticeable, which is not surprising. However, at f1.8, the Sirui still has less vignetting than the Lumix. Interestingly, the Sirui's vignetting doesn't really change from f2.8 onwards, meaning there's still a small amount of vignetting even at f16. The Lumix, on the other hand, gradually reduces vignetting as you stop it down. Could it have something to do with Sirui's 62mm front filter thread? After all, Lumix front filter thread is 67mm, even though it is a f1.8 lens. Chromatic aberration control on the Sirui is very good. Across all my real-world shots, I only see minimal color fringing. Even in high contrast areas, chromatic aberration is almost non-existent, which is quite impressive. These distortion tests are raw files converted to JPEG in Lightroom using default settings. Both lenses show minimal distortion, and the field of view is very similar. Interestingly, with the Lumix, I can disable profile correction in Lightroom and see noticeable distortion. With the Sirui, Lightroom doesn't allow me to disable profile correction. Lumix S5 II also doesn't have option to disable distortion correction. Lens flare control on the Sirui is quite good. Even with strong light sources or the sun in the frame, lens flare is generally well controlled. However, when compared side by side with the Lumix, we can see this is an area where the Sirui still has room for improvement. The Sirui performs well, but the Lumix is definitely better at controlling lens flare. For Sunstars, we need to stop down to around f8, where the Sirui starts producing Sunstars with long tails. They become sharper as you stop down further. This time, Sunstars are a weakness for the Lumix. You need to stop down to f16 to get decent Sunstars, and stopping down to f22 improve them further. The Sirui, however, only can stop down to f16. If you compare both lenses at the same aperture, the Sirui produces better looking Sunstars than the Lumix. For photo autofocus, the Sirui is a bit slower than modern first-party lenses like the Lumix 35 f1.8. I do notice some focus hunting, but accuracy is good and autofocus operation is reasonably quiet. In video mode, autofocus performance is very good. I tested with the Lumix S1 too, and it responds quickly with smooth transitions and no noticeable hunting. Human detection and other subject detection modes work as expected. Autofocus is also very quiet in video. Even when recording audio using the camera's internal microphone, I don't hear any autofocus noise. Focus breathing on the Sirui is quite noticeable. In this side-by-side comparison, you can easily see that the Sirui breathes much more than the Lumix. So, what do I think about the Sirui Aurora 35mm f1.4? After testing the Aurora 85mm f1.4 earlier this year, I already had high expectations, and this new 35mm doesn't disappoint. Image quality is excellent. I'd even say overall it performs a little bit better than the Lumix in terms of image quality, despite the Lumix still have advantages in areas like lens flare control and close focus performance. Build quality is excellent. It feels and handles like a premium lens and includes all the features I want. For the L-mount version, I'm still not a fan of relying on a USB port for firmware updates instead of using the camera body. But it works, so maybe I'm nitpicking. The main area that could be improved is autofocus speed. It's not as fast as the latest first-party lenses. It's perfectly fine for everyday photo and video use, but it will struggle with very fast action photography. Hopefully, Sirui can improve this in future autofocus lenses. Other than that, the Sirui Aurora 35mm f1.4 is a really strong option. Its overall performance is as good as a first-party lens, but offer better value for money. Unless you're going to shoot a lot of fast action, it's a lens I think you should seriously consider if you are looking for a fast 35mm lens for your L-mount, Sony E, Nikon Z or Fujifilm X camera.